paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers.
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Bryant, and welcome to the Nick Bryant Podcast. Today, I'll be elucidating the first major break in the Johnny Gosch case in close to 3 decades. To my audio followers, I'm starting this podcast with a 10-minute audiovisual montage of the Johnny Gosch case that features America's Most Wanted, John Walsh, Noreen Gosch, trafficking victim Paul Bonacci, America's Most Wanted producer Paul Sparrow, and an FBI agent who refuses to discuss the Johnny Gosch abduction. I felt this montage was important to get people semi-up to speed on the Johnny Gosch abduction. I have to disagree with Paul Sparrow on the FBI. The FBI was covering up the Franklin Scandal child trafficking network, which was a huge conspiracy. The Franklin network flew children from coast to coast, and FBI agents don't cover up an interstate child trafficking network without the consent of their superiors. And would their superiors dare cover up a child trafficking network without the consent of their superiors? 2 grand juries in Nebraska were hijacked to cover up the Franklin network. And someone could argue that a 3rd grand jury in Washington, D.C. was hijacked too. We also saw the FBI cover up the Epstein trafficking network. Maria Farmer initially reported the Epstein trafficking network to the FBI in 1996. One could argue that the vast majority of FBI agents are good people, but the FBI seems to have a very dark undercurrent of perfidious agents. However, I agree with Paul Sparrow on one thing. Paul Bonacci came into contact with Johnny Gosch. Because Paul Bonacci was a victim of the Franklin trafficking network and the FBI was covering up that network, it allotted him 0 credibility. If the FBI had listened to Paul Bonacci, Johnny Gosch most likely could have been found. Paul Bonacci led America's Most Wanted to a Colorado house with a chamber in the basement and near the elephant-shaped rock, and he was corroborated by a second victim who had also been to the house. The investigative skills of America's Most Wanted became rather lackadaisical after finding the house with the underground chamber in Colorado. America's Most Wanted producer Paul Sparrow said that the house was owned by a quote-unquote prison guard. It was empty and that all their leads had dried up. But that's not exactly true because the prison guard in question, Charles Crouch, is an inveterate pedophile. According to Chaffee County, Colorado assessor records, the home with the underground chamber was owned by Crouch and his wife from 1980 to 1994. Although the Crouches owned the property in Colorado, they also resided in New Mexico near Carlsbad. According to a July 18, 1963 article in the Carlsbad Current Argus, Charles Crouch was arrested for molesting 3 boys in Carlsbad when he was 19 years old. I did a criminal background check on Crouch, and the arrest and adjudication for those crimes do not appear in his criminal record. Crouch was a poisonous snake handler, and documentation from a civil lawsuit states that Crouch was bit by a poisonous snake on August 11, 1963. The lawsuit states that Crouch was working at a reptile garden some 15 or 20 miles from Carlsbad, New Mexico, and the doctor treating Crouch for the snake bite was inept. So it's rather strange that Crouch doesn't have a criminal record for molesting those 3 boys, and about a year later, he's working at a reptile garden. In 1986, the year Johnny Gosch was purportedly held at the Colorado house, Crouch became a fugitive from justice in Colorado and fled to Carlsbad. The case in Colorado was ultimately discharged, which meant Crouch was exonerated. Again, after a criminal background check in Colorado, Crouch's criminal record is clean. According to my interview of Crouch's former wife, he molested their oldest child and also her brother. Crouch is a serial predator who's never paid for his crimes. How could America's wanted have completely whiffed on him? He is still alive and justice needs to be served. In the upcoming week, I will share my documentation with law enforcement. Crouch is 79 years old and living in New Mexico. He should be forced to discuss the Johnny Gosch abduction. But will the corrupt law enforcement that covered up the Johnny Gosch abduction, the Franklin scandal, and the Epstein scandal continue to cover up the Johnny Gosch case? Major aberrations allowed Crouch to skate from child abuse charges. And over the years, I found that when such aberrations occur regarding child abuse, the authorities are often protecting a trafficking network. Now you will hear two interviews. The first interview is Charles Crouch's former wife discussing his predatory behavior. And the second interview you will hear is Noreen Gosch discussing the abduction of her son and its subsequent cover-up. I interviewed Noreen nearly 2 decades ago. She is a controversial and polarizing figure, but if your child was abducted and law enforcement covered up his or her abduction, I think most people, in the very least, would become controversial and polarizing. A short blog on Crouch in which I show the documentation that led me to him will accompany this podcast. Is this Gladys Crouch?
Yes.
Hi, Gladys. My name is Nick Bryant, and I'm a journalist. And I would like to ask you a couple of questions.
Concerning what?
The house that you owned in Colorado, I believe you bought it in 1980 and you sold it in 1994?
I don't remember all that, and I'm not a Crouch anymore anyway.
You're not a Crouch anymore?
No.
That might be a good thing.
Yeah, it is.
Did you know... What's that?
I waited way too long to make that happen.
Did you know that your former husband was arrested in 1963 for molesting 3 boys?
Yeah, I'm kind of aware of that.
And
I wasn't sure the details or anything, but
and
yeah, there was a whole big bunch of stuff like that, so.
And why didn't he go to prison for that?
You tell me.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
That was in when?
In 1963.
Right, yeah, see, that was long before I knew him, but I have no idea what all of that was about, so I didn't even really find out about that stuff until I started figuring out what he was doing, so.
What did you figure out what he was doing?
Well, I just got in, he was soliciting, he was soliciting male companionship on the internet, and I got in there and got to reading some of the stuff, and he it was just all of a sudden. I mean, hell, we were married for 41 years, and he molested my brother, he molested my oldest son, and I guess I was just really stupid.
Well,
and I'm sure there's others that I know there was one incident that down there in Carlsbad that he went. They arrested him down there, I think, or at least he went to court. And he didn't tell me anything about it. I showed up at court, and so the attorney said that I was going to be a witness, so I couldn't be in there to find out what was going on, because he never told me. I couldn't really tell me what happened. And anyway, I'm pretty sure I figured that one out, too. But, yeah, he ought to either be dead or in prison for sure.
You two owned a house in Colorado.
Right. We did in Buena Vista.
Buena Vista. And did you know that there were children being kept at that house?
Yeah, I learned that from, I think it was America's Most Wanted. Well, actually, I put 2 and 2 together and figured that's probably what it was, and that was after I was gone. So I don't know. I found out about it after we sold it. I didn't know, if there was something going on while I was there, but I know there wasn't anything while I was there, but.
And did he live there alone at all in the 1980s?
Yeah, I filed for divorce at one particular time, and I was at work one day, I was working construction. While I was at work one day, he went in and cleaned the house out and put everything in a storage unit. So I lived there for a short period of time. I don't know what year it was. I've kind of lost track of all of that. I could probably go back and look things up. But so, is there some reason you're calling to find out about that now, or what?
Yeah, I'm doing. I've got a podcast, and
okay.
I'm doing a piece on a boy that was abducted, and he appears to be taken to that particular house in Buena Vista. That
can you tell me if his name was Johnny Gosch?
His name was Johnny Gosch. Yes.
Okay, I'll never forget that story. That's about the time I started figuring maybe something, and I know that they had some guy that bought the place up there when we left, and it seemed to me like they called him the Colonel or something. I had absolutely no idea who this guy was. Hell, it could have been my ex-husband for that. I don't know, but yeah, that story, that's been years ago, and that story's been on my mind forever. So in fact, I still have the VHS tape of that show, and some of the stuff that went on. But
so that was. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say I had already. He had already moved to Carlsbad, and I stayed in Buena Vista. But I wasn't living at the house after. See, he sold it without me knowing about it.
And the house was sold in 1994, according to county assessor's records.
Well, yeah, I don't remember what year it was. I just know I didn't know he sold it. So, because I was with somebody else at that point in time. So,
according to a witness, Johnny Gosch was at that house in 1986. Approximately 4 years after he had been abducted. Did you hear anything about that or learn anything about that?
Well, no, not really, not anything that I could swear to, but I did, like I said, I just kind of heard enough rumors and everything that I kind of put two and two together and figured that that's where they were talking about.
And do you know who was living at that house in 1986?
No, I don't.
But so your husband would rent it out to various people?
I don't know that either.
Because someone was living there. I do.
Well, I'm sure they were. I mean, I was not. His mother died in. I don't remember anyway. I was living somewhere else there in Buena Vista, but he had moved to Carlsbad, and I didn't really have anything. I didn't know anything about what was going on there.
And you eventually figured out that your husband was a predator. How many years were you with him?
42.
42. And
off and on.
When did you start to get suspicious of his predatory behavior?
Actually, it was when he was working at the prison. I had started getting some rumors and stuff going around, but kind of had my head in the sand, I guess.
So he was working in a prison. He was a prison guard.
I guess you'd call him that. Yeah, it's there in Buena Vista. I don't know what they call it now. It's like a really open prison kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, it's not like a real hard case, but yeah, he worked there for a little while, and he got fired, and I never could figure out what that was going on. But I guess I've been suspicious for years and just kind of kept my head in the sand.
And when did he work at that prison? What years? Can you remember?
I don't know. I've kind of blocked a lot of that out. I could probably stop and figure it out.
And
I know we were still working on the house and building the house when he went to work there, so that was, pretty early in the marriage. So.
And did he introduce you to people that you suspected might be nefarious?
No.
No. So he kept you completely segregated from his predatory life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then, after we moved to Carlsbad, I started coming to Utah and staying for 3 or 4 months at a time to help take care of my mom. And that went on for about the last, well, she just died like last Monday, so. But anyway, I was coming up here and staying for 3 or 4 months at a time, and then that's when I kind of got, when I went back down there, I got on, actually he was doing it before that. We had a house up in the Sacramento Mountains, and I had a computer, and of course I was getting on it, but he was on that computer a whole lot more than he'd ever been, so I just tapped into his emails and started reading all this crap, so.
Did you think that he was part of a network?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Because I believe that Johnny Gosch was brought to that house by a criminal, and if your husband aided and abetted that criminal, that would be a conspiracy.
Right.
And it would show that there is the vestiges of a pedophile network.
Right. And see, I didn't know. And when we were getting our divorce, and I ended up going to, we were in court. I had to take him back to court 3 or 4 times to finally get things done. But that's when I learned that he still had warrants out in Colorado. One of the deputies there, that was a good friend of mine, started telling me all this stuff. So.
And I did discover that he had warrants out for his arrest in Colorado. And
right.
But here's the thing with him. He doesn't have a criminal record pertaining to molesting those 3 kids in New Mexico, and he doesn't seem to have a criminal record in Colorado.
Yeah.
And yet he was wanted in Colorado.
Well, that's what I understand, and that's why I'm like you. Why the hell is he not, away for life? It's
it's very strange.
Yeah, well, if you ever met him and talked to him, you'd find out he's very strange. He's a liar, he's a manipulator, he's crooked, I don't know, everything you want to know. He's a narcissist, I don't know.
So because he doesn't have a criminal record for molesting the kids in New Mexico, and because he doesn't have a criminal record in Colorado, do you think that he was protected some way?
I don't know. I really don't. I know he seemed to get away with a lot of shit. Excuse the French.
That's all right. I can speak French occasionally myself.
Okay.
Well, Glennis, is there anything else that you can tell me about your husband that just comes to mind now?
No, but I'd like to know what I don't want to be quoted in anything because I don't really know a whole lot. And I just do not get really involved in all of that. I've tried to get away from it, so.
Well, I'm recording you in a single-party state, so I'm doing it legally.
Where are you at?
I'm in New York City.
New York?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I had a phone call from somebody from New York the other day, and that's just what I report spam because I don't know anybody in New York.
That was me. I've tried to get a hold of you for a couple of days.
Oh, how'd you get my number?
I'm very good at getting people's numbers.
Okay, well, you're not the only one.
I believe that I found your husband's number, and former husband's number, and I left him some voicemails. And
yeah, his number's supposed to be unlisted.
I'm very good at getting all numbers, and
okay.
And I left him some voicemails, but he didn't return my call.
Well, of course he won't.
And I did talk to Kevin also.
Okay, and what did he have to say?
He didn't have to say too much. He was...
Well, yeah, I think he was kind of surprised too, but I don't know. I just, So have you got the number for my oldest son?
I do not, no.
Okay.
Is it a number that you'd want to give me, or...
No.
No? Okay. And he was molested by your husband, you said?
Uh-huh.
Okay. How's he doing?
Not good.
Because that type of trauma can cause someone trouble for a lifetime.
Right, he's an alcoholic.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I've been researching and writing about child trafficking for many years. And
Okay.
and I know that when someone is your husband, it sounds like he repeatedly molested your older son. That can cause tremendous trauma for someone, and it's very difficult for people to get over that kind of trauma.
Oh yeah, I know.
Well, Gladys, I really want to thank you for talking to me.
Okay.
And have yourself a good day.
All righty.
And do you have my number in case you want to call me?
You might want to let me write it down because I probably don't. I'm visually impaired. I'm legally blind, but I can. I don't use my phone that much. So let me have your phone number.
My number again. My name is Nick Bryant, and my number is 91.
I'm sorry. Is that Bryant? Bryant?
Yes.
Okay.
And my number is 91.
Okay.
4.
Okay. 3. Okay. And what do you have a name for your broadcast or your podcast or?
The Nick Bryant Podcast.
Okay.
And I really want to thank you for talking to me today.
Okay, I might do some more of that later on.
Okay, great. Have a good day.
You too.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
I'm with Johnny Gosch. It's January 31st, and we're meeting at the Marriott outside of Des Moines, Iowa.
I was able to go to the prison and interview Paul with a private investigator. And it was
And the investigator was?
The investigator was Roy Stevens.
Okay.
It was at that time that Paul shared how Johnny was kidnapped, why he was kidnapped, and that he indeed was the first person to molest Johnny for the sake of photographs that were taken. He was forced to do it, and then he was told...
And where was that? Did he tell you where it took place?
He told us that it took place in an abandoned house outside of Sioux City, Iowa.
Sioux City, Iowa?
Iowa. And that they had Johnny there for about 14 days, and then after the 14 days, a man came from Colorado who they called the Colonel, paid the kidnappers so many thousands of dollars for kidnapping Johnny, and looked at all the photographs that had been taken of Paul molesting him, and then he basically bought Johnny from the kidnappers and took Johnny to Colorado.
And who were the kidnappers that you...
The kidnappers that Paul identified were Emilio, and Emilio had about 12 aliases that he used. He identified a man by the name of Sam Soda, who they called Soda Pop, and he identified a man by the name of Charlie Kerr, and Charlie Kerr was a resident and owned the house that they were in.
Now, Sioux City, that's in Iowa or something?
It's in Iowa. It's on the Iowa side, but it's not far from South Dakota, and it's only about a 2-hour drive from Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay. And how do you know that Paul is telling the truth about this?
Number one, Paul had repeated the very same story, identical, word for word, to his attorney, to the private investigator, and to others before I ever went to see him. He never changed a word. Generally, when somebody lies, they tell a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and pretty soon they don't remember what they said to whom. Paul's story has always remained the same throughout all these years. He's never changed, not even a sentence. The other reason I believe it is because we were able to check out and confirm a lot of the things that Paul said. One of them being the location of the house. We found it. The house had been burned, but we found the basement area.
So, what the reasons that you feel that Paul Benassi is telling the truth about yourself?
The private investigator, Roy Stevens, went through many of the things that Paul told us and identified, confirmed. Another one was Charlie Kerr. We asked Paul to draw a picture of Charlie, because Paul is quite an artist. He drew a picture of Charlie. We then took that picture to the county attorney. And
who is Charlie Kerr?
Charlie Kerr was the owner of the house. where Johnny was held, and he was participated in the kidnapping, according to Paul. We took the photograph to the county attorney. The county attorney allowed Roy Stevens to go through mug books. And in the mug shot, they found a picture of Charlie who had a prior history of child abuse and sexual abuse of children.
And are there other reasons that you might... Was Paul able to identify unique physical things about your son?
Paul mentioned the one thing that was never listed in the media about Johnny, and that was an oval-shaped scar on his one ankle. And that had come from a burn that he got when he was sitting on his brother's motorcycle, and he just put his leg down and the tailpipe was hot when he was little. He wanted to sit up on the motorcycle, and his older brother had just shut it off, and he just put his leg too close, and it put a little burn there, and it was a little spot. And Paul knew about that, and that had never been in the news. We kept that information to ourselves.
Any other physical?
He described a birthmark on Johnny's chest, but that was one item that had been in the news media. And then Johnny had a bite mark on his tongue where he bit his own tongue when he fell down as a little kid. There was a horseshoe-shaped scar on his tongue. And that I don't believe had ever been in the news media, so Paul knew about those things. Those were clinchers that he had been with Johnny at some point. He knew about Johnny. The intimate detail.
And are there any other reasons why you believe Paul Benassi abducted your child?
Paul was able to identify the placement of the vehicles, the drivers of the vehicles that participated in the kidnapping. He identified from a layout of photographs a man's picture by the name of Sam Soda, who Paul states brought the photos of Johnny to the motel the night before the kidnapping. He identified the type of vehicle he was using, down to the type of door and the way it swung out and opened and closed on a station wagon. And I was able to verify that through the Department of Motor Vehicles that the man did own that vehicle. Paul described a van that was parked a couple blocks away from the kidnap scene that we knew existed from the earlier private investigator report. And Paul described that, and he even described which way the van was parked and which way the front end was pointed, because it was pointed contrary to traffic. And that's what was so noticeable by the person that saw it. And the private investigators that we hired initially in the case in the very beginning did interviews of all the residents in a radius of our home, and that's how we found out about the second vehicle.
Now, with Paul's story, are there any other things that you can think of? Any other points of corroboration?
Those were the main points that made me believe that the kid was telling the truth, and I've never wavered since the first time I met him. There was also a depth about Paul, a feeling with him as he was describing these things that I knew he was there. He could not have described so accurately all of these things except for the fact that he had been there.
Okay, now, how long ago did your son visit you?
He was there in March of 1997.
And how long did he stay?
About two and a half hours. Came in the middle of the night around 2 o'clock. And the reason he came, I had been on the Lisa Gibbons program in December of 1996. Near the end of the program, she asked each mother of a missing child who was on the program if they wanted to give a special message to their child, just in case the child might see it. So when the camera came to me, I looked at the camera and I said, Johnny, I just want you to know that no matter what's happened to you, I will help you in any way I can. I no longer live at our home, but I still live in West Des Moines. My address is in the phone book. I've divorced your father, and I live alone. And I said that on national TV.
And
3 months later, Johnny came to my door.
and what did he tell you in this 2.5 hours?
During our visit, Johnny told me, this is not good. Call the mechanic, I'm going to call him.
And he visited you for 2.5 hours?
He had another young man with him, and during the visit, I had lots of questions. It was very emotional because I hadn't seen him for 16, 18 years. And we talked, and I wanted to know where he was living. He wouldn't tell me. He would look at the other guy as if to say, can I tell her this or can't I? And the other guy would just kind of nod. He wouldn't give me his name. Johnny described how they had been transported all over the country. He did not go into the very most intimate details of his abuse. And I think that was probably to protect me and maybe embarrassment for him, because it was so graphic and it was so horrible. But the reason he came, he saw me on Lisa Gibbons, and he heard me say, I'll help you in any way I can. He came to give me the names of people that he knew were involved. He asked me if I could get people arrested and get this story moving, get the case solved, so that he could be free to come back to his family.
And what names did he give you?
He mentioned a lot of the same names that Paul Benassi had.
So, could you be more specific about that?
Johnny mentioned many of the same national political names that others like Paul Benassi have named, and Rusty, Nelson. He also mentioned a couple of people in Des Moines, Iowa that were part of this whole network. Des Moines has people here too that facilitated this, knew about it, protected one another. And he wanted me to do something about it. He is still operating on a level of what a 12-year-old would, because he's had no other education. And he thought by just telling me that, I could go to the police or the county attorney or the FBI, and I could tell them this, and that they would immediately go out and question him or start some kind of action. That's not the way it works. I told him I would try to do the very best I could. So what I did do was make an appointment with the county attorney. And when I went in there, I told him that an informant had come forward and gave me X amount of information. And I shared it with the county attorney. I just did not tell them that the informant was my son. The county attorney assembled members from the West Des Moines Police Department, the Des Moines Police Department, the Department of Criminal Investigation. The FBI declined to come. We all sat around a big table, and I shared with them what I had, and I had a folder for each of them. And they looked at me, and they said that they were not going to do anything with the information I got. And I said, let it be on record that I did at least share. Don't ever come back at me later and say I withheld information. And then during that...
And you gave them the names of the people that Johnny had said? All the names?
During that meeting, the county attorney said to me, we're not going to do anything with this until you turn over the boy. And I said, I don't have the boy. I can't turn over Johnny to you because I don't have him. And so they, as far as I know, stopped. I feel as though they probably didn't do anything more with it because nothing else ever happened. And it was at that moment I knew that I had to start my book. That was the only way that Johnny's story was going to be told the way it really happened. So that's what I did.
What kind of things was Johnny involved in? that he told you about?
Prostitution, pornography pictures. It's my suspicion, but nobody proved this to me, that he probably had to do some recruiting of other kids, just like Paul did. Probably taking an initial action of molesting others at gunpoint like Paul did. I imagine he was treated about the same as Paul. And I've been able to gather that from what little bit Johnny told me about his treatment, what Paul told me, what Rusty Nelson told me, and then another young witness by the name of Jimmy Gibson.
Now, he's not alive anymore, is he? I don't know. Have you heard?
Last I heard he was living in Wisconsin.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's the last I heard. I don't know for sure what his condition is or situation.
Do you think that your husband had anything to do with the abduction?
As far as the actual abduction, I don't know if he did or not. He behaved very suspiciously after the kidnapping. Most everybody thought it was just stress. He threatened to commit suicide several times. And maybe that's common after a kidnapping, when somebody is in the throes of grief. I don't know. But he wasn't particularly cooperative when it came time to actually go beyond Des Moines, Iowa in the search for Johnny. As long as it was a ground search, something physical to do, we could go out and beat the bushes. Yeah, he was on the team. But after that, you have to assume if nobody was found, the child's been taken outside the city, outside the state, and maybe outside the country.
What other reasons do you have for thinking that your husband might have been involved in the abduction?
I don't know if he was involved in the abduction. I do know that he behaved strangely. He insisted on taking Johnny on a business trip approximately 2 months before the kidnapping. He took him to Offutt Air Force Base, where he claimed that they spent an entire day. And when I asked my son about the trip, all he could remember and tell me was that he saw some big planes. And then he had no memory whatsoever of what took place the rest of the time that they were at Offutt Air Force Base. And at the time, I thought that was kind of strange, because I thought a kid would remember more than that from a big trip for them. That would be a big deal to a kid. And I didn't think much more about him. He was a good kid. And he suddenly became very, very quiet and much more reserved and kind of kept to himself. And I thought that was odd behavior. But then I knew in a few weeks he was going to be starting junior high, too. And I thought, well, maybe he's a little nervous about starting junior high school because it's a whole big change. And I just kind of attributed some of it to going into a new school. Well, as it turned out, he only went to the new school 2 days and then he was kidnapped.
And what other actions has your husband taken that have made you suspicious that he might have been involved in the abduction?
Well, I can't prove that John did this, but all I can tell you is on a regular basis I had Johnny's Social Security number checked by a private investigator. The Social Security number he had to get in order to be a paper boy. He had it in his name, but we had the paperwork. Johnny never had the paperwork. He probably didn't even know he had a Social Security number. At a certain point on one of the checks that we did, the private investigator found lots of financial activity on the Social Security number.
On Johnny's Social Security number.
And he called me back and he said, there's activity on Johnny's Social Security number. And I said, well, there's only one other person that knows his number, and that's his father.
What kind of activity? How much?
Somebody was doing, I mean, it was showing income, it was showing transactions.
What kind of income What kind of transactions were there?
Several thousand here, several thousand there. It added up. So I called the Social Security office to report it. And they said to me, we are not a police agency. It's not up to us to chase down people that use other people's Social Security numbers. Well, I was in shock. So I called the FBI office, and they didn't want it either. They weren't a bit interested as well. So nothing's been done about it. I just know that periodically there has been activity on that Social Security number. And the only other person that knew that Social Security number was Johnny's father. No, I can't prove that he did it. I'm just saying that in 1997, that seemed to be the year that everything started to break open. I had already met Benassi sometime earlier. Well, in 1997, ABC 2020, Karen Burns decided she wanted to do a 1-hour special on the Johnny Gosch story. So she flew my husband and I to New York. We met with her, mapped out what we were going to do, and then they made a date to come to Des Moines, Iowa. They did interviews here with me and with lots of other people. Then we made a trip over to Omaha, Nebraska, and on to Lincoln, Nebraska, to meet John DeCamp. We all trooped into his office, and John DeCamp came over and greeted me, shook my hand, and said, "It's so good to see you again." And I said, "Sir, this is the first time I've ever met you. I've never seen you before." And he said, "Well, sure you did. You came here right when Benassi first came forward. And we went out to the prison together, you and your husband." And at that point, he called in his associate in the office named Jan, his office manager. And he said, "Didn't John Gosch come here in the late 1988 or early 1989? And didn't we go out to the prison? Didn't he introduce this woman as his wife? Didn't we go talk to Benassi?" And his office manager looked at him and said, "Yes, he did come here. Yes, you did go to the prison. But it wasn't this woman, it was someone else." And that was the very first moment that I knew that my ex-husband had somebody else portraying me. Since that time, since that initial visit, I have found 25 other people who either had some type of interaction with that woman as she was introduced as Noreen Gosch by my ex-husband. And this all came in news to me from 1997 on. I had no clue that they did this. None. I now know the woman's name, and I put her picture in my book, and it was relayed to me that she suffered a stroke after she learned that her photograph was in my book, because it isn't clear yet whether or not I can press charges against her for impersonating me. If that time comes where I can do that.
Well, why isn't it clear?
Why isn't it clear?
That you can't press charges against her for impersonating.
I probably could, but it's whether or not I want to go through all the bullshit to do it. At this point, do I want to waste my time and money chasing after her in court? Or do I want to wait until we have a bigger part of this story before we enter a courtroom again? And then throw her into it as a more sinister part of it. And so that's why I didn't put her name in the book. I held her name back for that reason. He also told me that they had what they call safe houses throughout the United States. They would be in very, very remote areas so that you couldn't walk or run fast enough to get away during the time that the adults would leave the children on the compound, so to speak, and that the kids would just have to remain there. Sometimes they would be shackled, sometimes they would be put in cages, depending on what that facility had. And I asked him a very obvious question. I said, "What happened when you got sick or needed a dentist? Did you go all these years without ever getting sick?" And they said, "They brought doctors to us. They have doctors within the system that are also pedophiles, users of children, and they would bring these medical doctors in to treat us if we needed it. They saw to it that our hair was cut, that we were groomed, that we had beautiful, nice clothing when we were presented to the VIPs that wanted to buy our services." And I was told by Jimmy Gibson, another victim, that Johnny was known as the Golden Boy or the Media Kid. And the reason for that was I created so much of a storm in the United States that I created a lot of publicity for him that has lasted close to 20 years. And his perpetrators could get more money from the afternoon or evening of sex with him than they could for one of the other kids.
Did he tell you where this money went?
He had no idea. He had no idea where it went. He just knew that he was being used to make money for somebody. The kids were not told anything pertinent like that or how the business actually worked. His knowledge was as limited as what I just told you. But yet he wanted me to go forward, tell the story in the country, get people arrested so that he could be free. He didn't understand that just because I would go to the county attorney and say thus and so, that they're going to jump on their white horse and go do something if they refused. And I knew they would. I knew they wouldn't be able to operate without probable cause, and I couldn't give them that.
So, okay, have you talked to Johnny other than the night that?
Not that one, no. Not other than that one time. I've gotten messages through Paul Benassi and through one other individual that had been emailing with Johnny. And his email now is disabled or not operative because I tried to contact him 2 days ago and it came back that his email was no longer. And I don't have a new email address for him. But I know for a fact he was in communication with Johnny and they did it through email. This may or may not be important. It was after the trip to Offutt Air Force Base with Johnny, but it was 3 weeks before the kidnapping. John Gosch made a trip to South Carolina for his job. He called me about 7 o'clock at night while he was gone. He was due to take a flight out of there the next morning to come home. But when he called me, he was crying on the phone. And he said, I can't live with this anymore. I can't live with it. I just can't live with it. I'm going to kill myself tonight. And he hung up the phone. Well, the only thing I knew was that he was supposed to fly out the next morning. So I called the police department. And I told them that my husband had just called me and threatened to commit suicide. And I didn't know what hotel he was staying at. All I knew was that he had a rental car and he was supposed to have a flight out the next morning. The police in that city went to the airport. They got all the records for all the rental cars that had been given out in a 3-day period, found his car listed, and then they went to every motel.
Just recorder guy.
Okay. At the point when I got John on the phone and he called me back, I said to him, what was the deal about wanting to commit suicide, that you just couldn't live with something anymore, that it was eating you alive? Well, where was that? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. And even after he came home from that trip, we talked about it, and I said, what was that all about? And he said, I have no idea what you're talking about, Mary, and I never said any of that. But he did. It was as though I was dealing with somebody, 2 different personalities. And there again, I have no idea that it would have anything to do with the biggest, most horrific thing that has ever happened in my life, which occurred 3 weeks later, and that was the kidnapping of Johnny.